All right. Thank you for that brief presentation, but really, really insightful use. I think there's so many different use cases that we can deploy these type of models and solutions for, and the ways they're going to resonate across the entire spectrum, from the solopreneurs all the way up to full enterprise company deployments. It's going to shake things up. So we're going to take this opportunity now to invite Mark and Anastasia to the stage, our presenters for our first two talks today. I think it's especially relevant that we have you guys kind of all grouped here, because it's like you're both kind of at the front lines of how this is being used in broad applications. Whereas I say I probably still find myself more in the tinkerer department, the experimenter department, just trying to find cool and interesting use cases and tell people about it. So again, thank you both for being here and your presentations today. I think I'd like to start with Mark, but Anastasia, feel free to jump in on some of these, because there's so much overlap that I think people were asking in the questions that we'd love to hear from both your perspectives. So I think you each have an interesting kind of take and perspective on prompt engineering versus fine tuning, where the kind of line is. Mark, I'll start with you, obviously, because it's the whole kind of point of your talk. What do you find? What are the best use cases for just a really solid prompt versus maybe, hey, this is a case where it's better to start thinking about we should train a model?
Well, I think that in a year or two, every production model, it's going to be part of the best practices to do a fine tune. It helps with the prompt injection issues. It improves predictability. It can decrease your failure rate. And I loved your talk, by the way, Anastasia. I was taking notes. It was great. But right now, I think because ChatGPT blew everyone's minds and we're all focused on exploring the breadth of capabilities there, that there's not a reason necessarily to be optimizing yet, because we can just do so much with a prompt. But I definitely see it as I see prompt engineering as a really cool validation and prototyping stage, and then also something that's becoming part of the fine-tune model themselves, since a lot of fine-tune models are being trained on instruction-tuned foundation models, and you can combine the two. So it's an interesting hybrid.
No, definitely. And maybe I'll kind of add on to this question and pitch it to Anastasia. Some of the ways a lot of these things, the interaction, the way we interface with these LLMs is via a chatbot. In many cases, even if it's just a chatbot that is designed to do press releases for us. So we'd love to hear, specifically from your perspective to begin with. Again, focus on the prompt, focus on the fine tune, but is it better to create that persona chatbot with one or the other in your experience?
Do you mean the fine tuning or prompt engineering?
Yeah.
As a product manager, I'm mastering the art of saying no. So when someone asks whether I should fine tune, I prefer to say no, because it immediately creates so many questions about how we're going to actually test the fine-tuned model, and it just opens a new whole realm of challenges. So we prefer to solve with prompt engineering and information retrieval and context retrieval, everything that we can. And then we resort to fine-tuning if it's absolutely necessary. Still, the persona chatbot seems like a very complex and multi-level thing, and I think eventually we might end up creating some dedicated models for that. But I think prompt engineering is also good for POCing things, for creating the first version, making sure that it makes sense, and then, okay, I understand that I need a crazy few shots prompt to create something, and at some point I need to stop myself and say, okay, it's not few shots anymore, I'm fine-tuning and I'm going for this. But it's a research process. I need to arrive to fine-tuning. It's not something I will start with.
No, that makes complete sense. I'm sure, Mark, I'd love to give you a chance because you may have some very unique perspective on that. Anastasia, you more convinced that fine tuning is a better prospect here after the way Mark pitched it to us at all?
Slightly.
That's a win, I think. I think that's you definitely simplified it, and one of the things that I was really surprised by is the amount of interactions or data points you need just at a baseline to even start fine tuning and getting a really really strong result. I would speculate from a data science background, you probably need 100, you need 250, something like that. But to see, hey, we're just going to hit it with 20 and it's going to get us 90% of the way there, especially with regards to the cost savings, is pretty tremendous. Yeah. So I think just on the topic of data, um, you know, data quality is so important, I imagine, when you're doing a fine tune in any capacity, especially when you're only using maybe only 20 examples to do so. What steps do you recommend, or what does maybe Entry Point do in advance to prepare data for fine tuning, so it can be a no code process?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing you can do also if you are using an engineered prompt in production is start logging those results. And you've got your data set right there. So that's one pathway if you're already that far along. But starting from the beginning, if you can start with a handful of really high quality examples, you can use large language models to help you augment your data set. We built a tool for this called data synthesis, but it's essentially just using a prompt. So still love prompt engineering to generate examples that are like different or similar to your existing examples to try to diversify or like steer your data set to cover different edge cases or different categories of types of input. So the large language models themselves can be really, really helpful in building your fine-tuning data set.
Yeah, I have to imagine that the iterations are almost just as important as the results. The journey is almost even more important when you're fine tuning. I want to shift back to the kind of enterprise realm and hope, Anastasia, you could maybe give us some perspective. I mean, there's a lot of talk, and you see headlines like, prompt engineers are going to get $350,000 a year, but even people who are in this field that are maybe even trying to aspire or pursue jobs where they're going to be the AI whisperer or prompt engineer at a company. Where do you kind of see prompt engineering kind of currently living within an enterprise? Like what the tasks and duties of a prompt engineer aside from just knowing how to talk to AI?
Good question. For now I see it more as a skill rather than a separate role. So, for example, I work at Wix, and in Wix we have lots of content writers, people that are professionals with words. And this is another skill that they are mastering now, how to talk to large language models. And they have a very good base for it. It's also something that requires a skill set below it. You need either be very good with data or very good with words. And now we are trying to see where the places where prompt engineering fits as a skill, and we find that it might be relevant for content writers, for data labelers, and data analysts. So they can experiment with data. For example, I think it's a topic for a separate talk, but we did a lot of experimentation with data labeling with prompt engineering. And we thought how we can transform the role of the data labeler into the role of a prompt engineer and data labeler. And it actually was an amazing experience for the whole team. And I think what we will see is not a creation of a new role, but transformation of old ones.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. And I have to imagine there's now this new paradigm that has emerged because you have these models and these databases and these tools and workflows being created by probably folks traditionally on the software engineering side, but then to validate the results, they need to engage with those people who are content creators primarily or expert writers and things like that. how have you seen, or what do you kind of see as the best kind of mix in this new paradigm where the software developers, the engineers, using natural language processing based, tools and solutions, and building these models, can, refine and get the interface and bring the linguists and the copywriters and these type of folks, into the building kind of equation.
So yeah, this is something that I try to approach in my talk, but of course it's a bit bigger than just a small presentation. I think it's a collaboration, and I think it's a conversation that we used to have about quality assurance, for example, that the quality assurance engineer should be there from the stage of designing a product and come up with all the cases and everything. And now we can say the same things about prompt engineer, about the person who will be responsible for the quality of the outputs. We say that this person should be involved in the product design, try to understand what this prompt will take as an input, what we expect as output, what are the criteria, and then form the criteria, and then form the test set, and then so it's a chain of different stages in this flow. And in each stage, there should be someone who is involved. And I think it's a collaboration. And currently, we have a lot of teams, and they have, like, some teams are so lucky to have people of different skills, and some teams are very small. And we try to allow people to do everything, to allow everyone to be involved in it. And we see how some people actually get very interested and get very insightful, and just go for it, and they become the focal point of prompt engineering in given team. I think it's the best for now to give people freedom to experiment and give their input.
Yeah, perhaps that's their label. They're the AI agent on their team, if you will, because that's one of the great things about prompt engineering. Everyone's perspective is valuable in terms of how they look at a problem and what they can bring to the table and put in a prompt. And I'm so glad you brought up, prompts and tool chains and that kind of QA flow. We had a great question from Kevin Cole about this. I'm going to pitch it back over to Mark. But feel free to jump in and talk about some of the things that you're doing at Wix, Anastasia. How are developers systematically evaluating prompts, models, and tool chains? Dan, feel free to jump in too, because this is definitely your department.
Well, actually, Dan and I just came out of the AI Engineer Summit, and there was a lot of talk about this and how to do evaluations. It's definitely a work in progress. With like classifiers, where it's just a very simple type of output, there can usually be like a true answer, and you can just match and say, like, is it outputting like what I expect? But you have to have the input output pairs to be able to do any kind of comparison. There's also human review, which is kind of the gold standard right now until there's better tools. And there's quite a bit of optimism around having large language models with the proper prompts actually evaluate your validation data set too. But it all comes down to having an evaluation data set. So essentially, you need to know like what you're expecting, just like Anastasia is saying about defining that early in the process of like what your quality of output needs to look like.
Yeah, and that I think is why you need those experts in those areas to feed that, to provide that insight. Anastasia, any perspective you'd like to kind of add to this question, given that this is exactly the type of thing you're using for QA type workflows?
I guess, as everyone, we are still trying to define what is the perfect QA process here, but I'm actually working on some tool set for all our teams to allow them to have a very clear process of defining the prompts. Also, it's a returning to enterprise issues. We have tens of different teams working on different features, and most of them doing something like that for the first time. And we need to provide them clear guidance of how to do this evaluation, because the data science team cannot do this for everyone. Everyone needs to learn these skills and to learn this process and to have the appropriate tools to do this. And this is why we are trying to also pinpoint the places where we can automate where we can do something like the best scenario, is when we can evaluate LLM with LLM, but it's not always the case, right? And sometimes we can actually have very simple automated tests. Sometimes we can connect custom automations, but I think the critical point is being able to actually understand the criteria. If you take one prompt and you separate it into 10 criteria that you're interested in, and then you can kind of separate the manual work from automatic, and then you can simplify things more and more. But again, there should be a person in the loop, at least for now. Nothing can be done.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't let Dan chime in on this question.
Yeah, I mean, so we do a lot of this at Prompt Hub in terms of making the testing across models easier and doing it in a team setting. But I really like what Anastasia has been saying about having clear evaluations from the front that aren't just thumbs up and thumbs down, right? Like these prompts and outputs have varied aspects to them, from tone to how factual was it. So having clear evaluations from the front, I think, is really important. And I don't think there's a problem with having humans doing a big part of the evaluation in the beginning. We can use LLMs to help, I think, after. But as Anastasia said, this is partially an educational process too. And so you need to equip the people in your team with the knowledge to be able to understand these and to be able to get their hands in there with the tools and understand how inputs and outputs work with these things. And so we see a lot of people just doing human evaluations as well and getting some feedback from their users that's user driven. But until there are kind of better ways to do it, I think human evaluations get you like a really far way of the ways there. And yeah, that's what we see a lot in terms of the companies using Prompt Hub and whatnot. I'd love to kind of just throw out one quick question at Anastasia as well. You have a lot of experience pushing these products through to production, and it's impossible to know that these LLMs will always follow the rules. So how do you think about guardrails and handling? You talked about fallbacks in your talk. Would love to kind of know how that actually looks a little bit more in practice for when unpredictable things happen.
I think most important is to understand where we can fall and then to plan what exactly we are going to do, and also to understand how critical it is, because in some cases when we are trying just to fill some short creative line for the user, it's great to be correct, but it's not important, let's say. And sometimes when we are trying, for example, to help user to do something to make sure that they, for example, if we're building a support agent or something that needs to really provide correct information, then it becomes critical in fallbacks. And for example, we need to first pinpoint places where the model just fails to answer, and then we need, for example, to switch person to a live person actually to answer them, or do a chain of retries and make sure that user understands that we are still with them, that the program is not stuck, that nothing is broken, that we're still working on it, or default user to some default content and say that to prepare some pieces of text that user can take if we didn't manage to generate what they wanted. There are different ways to handle these fallbacks. They're super product specific. I think my main point is just we always need to be aware of these situations. When the format was not correct in the end, when the quality was off, when the information was misleading, it was hallucination or whatever, we need to list these things, plan these things, and make sure we are not failing the user in critical places.
No, absolutely. I'd love to hear, Mark, your perspective, and maybe even extend this beyond prompts. How do you ensure that the fine-tuned models play nice and are constantly refined and modeled? You mentioned the kind of loop based in feeding things back, but what are your kind of perspective and recommendation for once these things are deployed in production?
Yeah, once they're in production, I mean, good logging. Also getting the user's feedback on, even if everything seemed to go really well on your end, that simple like thumbs up, thumbs down to be able to track, like, or some kind of heuristic, like, did the user then take an action using the content that could imply it was good and it was useful. This is really powerful. This is like what we're doing with RLHF, basically. And that can allow you to at least refine your prompt and identify maybe the prompts that aren't working. Like if they immediately exit the page, once they get it, then, you can review those as like, okay, these aren't very good. Can we improve these? And you can have this data set of like, all right, these clearly help the user. Let's like, in the case of fine tuning, you're adding that back into your data set. In the case of prompt engineering, you're, reviewing it in some way to try to learn of like, what can we improve about our prompt? So.
No, that's such an interesting perspective. And I've never even thought of it or considered it that way, but it makes total sense. Like if someone presses the copy text button after a generation, that probably means they liked it. And that in and of itself, that UX is a valuable piece of information that can be fed back into a model for fine tuning. Wow. I'm like, of course, that's the way that would work. But that's so interesting. I'm going to bring a question forward from before, because I think it's specifically relevant to what we're talking about now, and having production versions of some of the things that we're building. I think one of the areas that I think we all know are going to get impacted the most is things like customer service, information retrieval. From each of your perspectives, like, is it going to be easier or harder to get to the human? Is it going to be completely automated? Models and agents kind of providing us the Amazon return label that we need to send our ice cube trays back. I would love to hear kind of each of your perspectives here, given that some of the things you do and some of the work that you do are enablers of some of this technology. I'll start with Mark.
I have a strong opinion. It's already very hard to talk to a human, so it's not going to get any harder. Like you cannot go to a corporate website and find a real person until you jump through 30 hoops. So my hope is that since they already go to this great effort to segment out like your particular need as a customer, like hopefully they can just do a better job so that I don't have to talk to a person. I do not feel that where we are at with large language models is capable of fully automating a lot of complex human tasks. These are like helpers. They can do amazing things that are very complementary to our previous tool set of being able to program rules. But they are not, I do not believe there are any autonomous agents in the world based on large language models in this very day. That could change very quickly, faster than we think. But right now I'm excited about the practical applications of these tools to make like micro interactions and medium interactions like way less painful or high friction.
Anastasia, would love to hear your perspective.
First of all, I will totally agree. But I think the important point that our desire to talk to a human comes from frustration. And it's the idea, when can I talk to a person? It's when something goes wrong. And it's probably, it will be hard to get to a human in any case. Probably the agents won't be great for the few years from now, at least. But it's up to us to improve the user experience so much that they won't be that frustrated, that everyone will be just happy with the bots they had. I recently had to do some change on my flight, and I called in. They got this just very stupid bot, press 1, if press 2. But I did everything I wanted to do. It was just perfect. It was so fast. I didn't want to talk to any real person, actually. Like, it's also a lot of stress, right?
Yeah.
So if these automated systems will be good enough, no one will want to talk to a human. That's my take.
No, I mean, there's an interesting bit of information from the company HelloFresh with their chatbot that they've deployed, and they've had a chatbot for years, since like 2017 or 2018, and they've added more LLM type features. But they started to look at some of the second and third order effects of that. And they actually found that their employee retention improved about 22%, and their employee job satisfaction improved 18%, because their customer service agents weren't having to do these information retrieval tasks that were really, really simple. And they'd actually had a better sense of job satisfaction because their actually helping customers with complex problems, as opposed to just answering the same question over and over again. So I'm glad that you guys offered both of those perspectives. I just want to finish today. I want to give you guys the opportunity to, hey, predict the future for us. What emerging trends are you most excited about, and what future developments do you kind of see in the near term and long-term horizon that excites you? Mark, why don't you kick us off?
Of course, I'm bullish on fine-tuning. I think multimodal models are also really exciting, and this idea that there can be a common mathematical vector language behind the scenes that our images, our video, our audio, our text are all using to like represent meaning. And the cool things we can even do once we have that common language, or those embeddings is what they're called. There's just a lot of exciting stuff there. I also think that there's been so much excitement that maybe there's going to be a plateau, is my best guess, of like once we get past a few more like exciting applications and things, it's like, oh, we're a little bit disappointed that like we don't have AGI yet, 5 years from now, or like, but at the same time, we'll be like applying these models and we'll be adding so much value to our economy, and like hopefully improving job satisfaction for a lot of people. I think we're going to be at full employment for a long time. I mean, I can't predict the future. This is how I feel emotionally. I'm also a little worried about people not being able to know what's real. And I hope that the AI can also be a tool to help people properly identify what's real. So I just hope the good guys with AI in their hands win out over the bad guys with AI in their hands. And
cautious optimism is a good track to take in the generative AI revolution. Anastasia, please predict the future for us.
Yeah, I also share this concern, especially when I'm scrolling my Facebook feed and I see so much already fake generated pictures of some places in nature that for surely don't exist, but I just know where to look, and people probably don't usually. These mid-journey beautiful places. Anyway, I think our nearest future lays more in application area than in this fast development area. I think we'll find more better user experience for these things, because I think at some point everyone said, okay, let's do everything in chat, but it's impossible to have everything as a chat, right? You don't know what to say. It's uncomfortable. It's usually too many words instead of just one click. I think we will find better interactions with AI. Natural language is exciting, but not always the optimal way to do things. And I think it will take a while before the next big thing. So we'll have to be comfortable with this one first.
No, that's fine. Given the pace of change these days, there's plenty to take in. Well, Mark, Anastasia, thank you both so much for your insightful presentations, your wonderful responses to our questions and our audience's questions. We thank you again for your time and participation. Attendees, we are going to take a 10-minute coffee break and then conclude with our final 3 speakers.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.